Laughing Vikings Live. High vibe chats with actors, comedians, and creators, plus stand-up comedy, sketch comedy, and most importantly, you. That's right, join us every Monday for new episodes, and you can be a part of the show on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Twitch. Ask questions and interact in the comments, and make sure to share this with your actor, comedian, and creator friends so they can be a part of the show too. Can't make a live show? No problem. You can catch up on your favorite podcast platform and visit laughingvikings.com to find out how you can join the cast and crew. All right, it's time for today's show. Buckle up and make sure you stick around to the end because we have a special surprise for you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is Laughing Vikings Live. Happy Monday Fun Day. Let's go. Welcome back to today's episode. We're here live from Laughing Vikings. I'm here in Comedy Alley. Brandon, the BK Broiler himself, is in the back stewed. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing fantastic, Lars. It was a good weekend. How was yours?
It was amazing. Fantastic for many, many reasons, one of which is the focus of today's episode. But first, for those who've been paying attention, we had the actually, it wasn't the grand opening. We had an opening of Comedy Alley here last, when did we do it? Friday. It was Friday night. And was it Friday? It was either Friday or Saturday. It was Friday, wasn't it? Yeah, yes. I lose track. It's all a blur to me. But so Friday night, we had our first pro show. We had Mo Ishmael, we had Che DeReina, we had Sandra Battellini, we had Monty Scott, and I hosted a shindig here. We had our first paid customers. It was a sellout because all of the tickets we sold, all of those people came out. So it was a sellout. Well under guidelines and gathering limits and all that kind of thing. By sellout, I'm kind of saying that facetiously, but we had a grand old time. And the day before that, on Thursday, I had an occurrence in my life, Brandon, I feel is one of the greatest accomplishments of my life. I don't know if you've ever had a day like this, but I had a day as a 43-year-old adult male where I was like, I think this might be like top 5 days of my life. That event was I bought not one, but 2 kazoos. I had a 2 kazoo day. Yeah, I bought, not only did I buy an acoustic right here, check out the acoustic. I also bought, I didn't even know this thing existed. I bought an electric kazoo. So if you're wondering how old Larsy Boy's doing these two recently, he's doing pretty good. He's living a 2 kazoo life right now. So the story is I went to Long and McQuaid. Thank you, Long and McQuaid. They're not a sponsor, but they've provided a ton of the gear here. During the pandemic, I went and basically bought one of every microphone there. We decked ourselves out here in the studio with all kinds of sound and all kinds of gear. And I wanted to get an outdoor amp, kind of just double check for the battery before we start doing live shows. So I brought it into them. And while they were dealing with that, I started to browse around. I'm like, give me a few minutes, I'll browse around. So I found one of these.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, fun.
And one of these. What's that, you say? Is that an apple? Not just any apple. It's a shaker apple. Also, you got to compare apples to oranges, of course. So I got one of those here. And when life gives you lemons, you turn them into lemon meringue shakers. Right here, I got one of those. And nothing funnier than a good old comedy banana shaker. Look at this. Yeah. And maybe the pièce de résistance on top of that electric kazoo. I think this is the official comedy instrument right here. A good old slide whistle. But seriously, 2 kazoos. So living the life right now.
James Tooby's surprised and also ecstatic, I assume.
That is crazy. Hashtag living my best life, Jim. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and be like, I don't think I have enough kazoos in my life. I need to rectify that. This is the classic here. Hey, this one was about $5.99. But yeah, the old electric here, which if you're like, how does an electric kazoo even work? It is, it's made of plastic, but then there's a pickup that goes into the hole here,
Okay.
And then the this actually plugs in, and the little 1/4 inch goes into the amp, and then you just rock out.
There you go.
With your kazoo. So come by Comedy Alley. The moral of the story is come check out shows at Comedy Alley, because I have all of the instruments you need for a comedy show. A fruit bowl. The funny thing is I grabbed all that stuff up, and if you're wondering how much does comedy cost, I believe this was about $165 for all of that stuff. But that's 2 kazoos and a whole fruit bowl full of instruments. As I'm approaching the checkout, the guy sees me and he's like, "Did you find everything you need tonight?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't find anything I needed tonight. I found a shit ton of stuff I didn't need, but I kind of do need it. So let's just ring me up here."
Because when you run an audition studio,
Hello?
you never know what you're going to need.
Hello? All of this stuff, yeah, maybe it's props for auditions, but a lot of it is for show stuff. I mean, you need a good tambourine. And then also, as things are opening up and people are getting vaccinated, at some point we're going to want to have gatherings. And I feel there's no faster way to start a band than just throw somebody a tambourine and a banana shaker. Right?
Immediate hit right there.
Exactly.
There you go. Ooh.
All right. So that was the number one reason. That was the first reason the weekend was amazing. The second reason the weekend was amazing, as I'm sure everyone knows, is yesterday, Sunday, was Father's Day. And the subject of our episode today, our let me say that again. Our special guest is none other than my father. Let's bring him on into the studio. Fred Larsen, live from Hawkstone, which is between Barrie and Orillia, grandfather of Laughing Vikings. There he is, everyone. Here he is.
Woo!
Hey.
Hey, Lars. Hey, Brendan.
Hey.
Welcome. Nice to see you. It's funny because less than, what time was it when I left? I think I was there with you in that room at 11 a.m. this morning with Camille. We're up there visiting you. Yeah, we just saw you. This is nice. I see you twice in one day, once in real life, once online. And thank you for
Real life too, you know. I am alive.
Good. Perfect. Yes. And you live out in the country between Orillia and Barrie, Hawkstone, for those people who don't know exactly where it is. That's sort of
Oro Medonte. Beautiful part of the country.
And we also, just special for the show, we got you swagged up. You want to flash that swag? What are you wearing there? Who are you wearing? Ooh, nice. Who wore it best? Yeah.
Chris Drum says, "Looking good, Fred."
Nice. Yeah, we got live comment from Chris Drum, who I went to high school with, and was a former. He used to play volleyball together as well, too.
Hey, good to see you. Good to hear you, Chris.
And Jim Tooby says, "Hello, Grand Viking father." Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Well, welcome to the show. You're also you're in Oro-Medonte, which is between Orillia and Barrie. We're here in Laughing Vikings, which is in Toronto. One thing that we started a few episodes ago is we wanted to also acknowledge and recognize that the original lands here that we are on in Toronto were originally belonging to the Anishinaabe and also the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people. So we want to acknowledge that, and also to acknowledge the ongoing and enduring presence of all of our Indigenous and First Nations people, the Métis and also the Inuit as well. So that's a precedent that we want to begin here. And I know that you in the Orillia area, Dad, you're always, at least recently, you've been very active with the Indigenous population out on Rama Reserve. Is that the name of it now? Or is it?
Yeah, we have. They partnered with us a couple of times over the last 3 years to put on a First Nations Writers Festival and storytelling and this sort of thing. And we've had about, over the last 3 years, well, not last year, COVID stopped that, of course, too. But up till 2019, we've had about 30 First Nations writers from across Canada reading from their books, talking about how their books arose, and sharing their own personal stories. It's been fabulous. It's been very educational, very informative. And some of those stories aren't so nice, but they're the truth that we all need to know for sure.
Is there a story that you'll never forget or that you could tell us right now? Without giving any names, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of the books that I tried to read all of the books that came to, of the authors that came to our festival.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have gone through some extraordinarily difficult times as children, as teenagers, and as adults, very often struggling with alcoholism and drugs occasionally too, but all going back really to the experiences of the residential schools that their parents were in, and often even the 60s scoop here in Ontario as well, where a number of Indigenous children were taken and put into foster care. And even today, we're seeing a great many, far too many First Nations children in foster care across Canada. I think they're only a certain percentage of the population, but they're about 40% of the kids that are in foster care. And something still needs to be sorted out about all of that. It's not right. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing, Fred.
I was always impressed, Dad, too, when you were involved in politics and running there. You always seemed to make extra effort to reach out to the reserve and to the Indigenous and First Nations people and make sure that they were included and that their voices were heard. And obviously that people need to lead the way to do that. So thank you for doing that.
Well, absolutely, it's absolutely necessary to do that. And I was very fortunate because among my other careers, I was a teacher here in Orillia for 30 years, and many of my students over that time were from the local reserve, Rama First Nation. And so I have good friends in Rama that it's always a pleasure to connect with again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Shout out to the Snake brothers. Or I guess they're cousins, Darren Snake and Jamie Snake, but they basically acted like they were brothers. And we have another former student right here. Look who's popped by, Matthew Birch. Good to see your dad doing great. You remember Matthew Birch? I played baseball with Jamie Snake and Darren Snake, and Matthew was on that team. Crazy story about Matthew Birch. One time we were playing Markham. I don't know if you were there for this, Dad, but we were playing Markham, and Matthew's on third, or he rounds third. He's coming home. The other team's catcher gets the ball way in advance. He's a dead duck at home. Matthew, being the athlete and a little bit bold in the head at that point, does a flying drop kick into the catcher. Flying drop kick, chest him with cleats into his chest, lays out the catcher. Safe. I think he was safe too. It was amazing. We had never seen anything like it before. I was like, oh my God. So a shout out to Matthew Birch. I don't know if you're still drop kicking catchers these days, but if you are, kudos to you. So we just want to shift gears a little bit. We're going to take it back. A segment that we always like to begin with is we have something called the 1 minute life story. So Dad, your task here in a moment is you're going to be given 1 minute. Brandon's going to time it on the clock. Take us back from birth all the way to present. That's a lot of years. I did the math. You've got about 7 seconds per decade. So you got to really only find the highlights. But here we go. You all ready? You ready?
I'm
Fred?
ready.
You ready, Fred? Okay. This is Fred Larsen's 1 minute life story starting now.
Born in BC, raised in the Okanagan, went to university at UBC in Vancouver. Following UBC, drove with a friend of mine to Toronto, ended up joining a singing group out of Toronto. And for the next 4 or 5 years, we were in New York and various places on the East Coast, including the Caribbean. Met my first wife there in New York City, married her. Our first child was born there, Chris. And then after the group broke up, which groups do, we went back to the Okanagan, to Penticton. Lars's older brother, James, was born there. And following his birth, we came back to Ontario. I ended up becoming a teacher in Orillia. And 30 years later, I retired. And here I am now, the grandfather of Laughing Vikings.
Oh,
Ding, 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 ding. We did miss one very important detail, and it was only because you spent so much time
You're right.
on the early years. But your second wife, Lois, is also there and has been a big part of the last, how many years now? 12, 13?
We'll be 15 this year.
Wow, congratulations. So
I think I also forgot to mention the arrival of Lars Classington as well in 1978.
here I am.
Sorry about that, Lars.
Couldn't miss me. Oh, they figured.
It was a wonderful occasion.
They knew I was in there somewhere. Yes. Exactly. Well, good to have you. We want to. I want to flash forwards. We got a lot to cover from the Okanagan days. We want to talk about your singing days and how you met Mom in New York and all that stuff, and maybe some of your teaching years. But recently, for those people who've been paying attention to my social media, they would have known that in November and December, you had an incredibly scary medical situation that put you into the hospital, ended up being in intensive care. You ended up being on a ventilator and in an induced coma for 12 days. And in total, I think you were there about 60 days, and you're at home recovering now. So first of all, welcome and thank you for fighting through that so that you can even be here for that. And to all the listeners and viewers, we got a ton of love from family and friends and from Laughing Vikings clients and supporters throughout that.
Absolutely.
So I think you're a bit of a local legend and hero here around Laughing Vikings. And I almost get asked on a daily basis, people following up on you. So thank you for all that.
Well, I owe a great thanks to our medical community here in Orillia. I got fabulous care, and I think I'm very lucky to still be here, given what I went through. And but I'm very glad to be here.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, there's no doubt without the medicine, like to paint the picture, not to get into it too much, but you had a fairly serious surgery that was supposed to be smoother, like fairly serious, but kind of routine these days. You were supposed to be in and out in a week, and then you had some infections take place and sort of some sepsis, and then sort of organ by organ things started to shut down, and so they had to go into intensive care mode. When I arrived in intensive care, it was kind of interesting because all of this, of course, is happening under the backdrop of a global pandemic with COVID. So the hospitals are already running under weird protocol. We weren't allowed to see you when you were in the regular ward, but then as soon as you were in intensive care, they did allow very, very limited visitors. So the first day I got up there, and I had never seen you like this. Most of your life, you've been very active and very healthy and fit and robust. But when I walked in, you were in intensive care, unconscious in an induced coma, on a ventilator. You were on a dialysis machine, which is all your blood running because your kidneys had shut down. So they're taking all your blood out of your body, running it through a machine to filter it. And then you were also on a 9-bag or a 9-bag IV tree with like every concoction of painkillers and antibiotics and all kinds of things. So like when I walked in, you were literally like, this is a hospital and a team of experts keeping you alive with machines and by tweaking all your levels and stuff. It was mind blowing to see that. But yeah.
I'm
so
kind of glad I don't have any memories of that whole month of November.
Right.
That's the time we're talking about. And
right.
By the time I started to recognize the world around me, it was December, and most of that was behind me.
Yeah. It was tough seeing you come out of that too, because obviously that after that long with so many tubes and hooked up, like must have just been the most uncomfortable thing, but you can't quite speak yet. So you can't really like express the things that you need help with either. So it was very frustrating for a little while, but the nurses in the hospital, like seeing them react every time something would change, like if you would take a turn for the worse, they would immediately identify what it was, immediately enact some kind of solution, and then you'd be back to where you needed to be. So it was pretty fascinating to see them work how they did. It was mind blowing. But you did, and I don't know how much you remember this, but towards the end, something that's very common, and I didn't know this before, but when people go into heavy sedation or coma-like, or to be intubated with ventilators, coming out of that, you're in such a foggy, sort of delusional, weird state. Also, it's the painkillers. You started to have some, like, I would imagine it's like sort of like lucid dreams, or sort of like being in a horror movie where you're just like, especially for you, because you weren't going in there for 60 days. You were thinking you were going in there for a week, and all of a sudden it's gone all haywire. Can you share, what do you remember about that narrative? Because what you told us, and in particular, one day you leaned over to me, and you looked me dead in the eyes, and you're like, when we get out of here, I got a lot to tell you about, like, and I'm like, what is this? Like, so.
Well, I also told Lois that one day, Lois, get out of here, because there were terrorists after me, and I traveled to England, back to Orillia on a Canadian Air Force plane, ended up in a kind of semi-prison somewhere where the guards were people you didn't want to tick off because they held a grudge for a long, long time, and they had ways to hurt you. And probably some of that hurting was coming from what was happening to me, but it was a whole other story. And I have promised your brother, Chris, that I will try and write down some of that story. I haven't done it yet, but I still, it's vivid as can be. It's hard to believe how vivid it still is in my mind. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense too, when you think about what you're going through, like these terrorists, and you're captured. There were some times where, when you were on the ventilator, you were actually, your arms were restrained, because the tendency is to grab tubes out of you and to want to get that discomfort away from you. Yeah. So it was like, if you've seen V for Vendetta, when Natalie Portman gets tossed in the jail and she's being like tortured and abused, it must have felt like that. Was awful. Yeah. But so you got out of that to, it was weird. We spent Christmas with you via Zoom. You were still in intensive care, so we couldn't visit you. We actually did a live stream comedy show at Laughing Vikings, where you dialed in via Zoom and gave us an amazingly heartfelt, for a lot of people, was the highlight, or at least the heart of our Christmas special, dialing in and giving us a message of good cheer and kindness and peace and all that. And then you got out early January, and like first or second week in January, we find out, drum roll please, you win Citizen of the Year for 2020. Yes, so you go from hanging by a thread in the Orillia Soldiers Memorial Hospital. They kept you alive. No wonder they kept you alive. They're like, we need to give this guy his trophy. So congratulations, Citizen of the Year 2020, City of Orillia. And I know you, maybe you can share some of that work with us. I know you've always sort of throughout your life, but I think even you're one of those people, even after retirement, you're almost more busy or more involved with the community than you ever were. Like your itinerary. I was just going to say, pre-COVID, your itinerary was like every night of the week. You have multiple meetings because you're a member of this club and this committee and that committee and this committee. So tell us about some of the initiatives that you're involved in here in Orillia, and sort of what led to that nomination.
Well, it seems that whenever somebody is looking for somebody to be the president, or to be the person that has to, go out in front of the media or whatever, that I volunteer to do things like that. So I have been president of the local Kiwanis Club about 3 years ago, I guess now. I'm now past president, and one of the very great, what's the word I'm looking for, activities that I've really enjoyed is there's been a choir called the Orillia Vocal Ensemble. A friend of mine, Roy Mena, started back in about 10, 12 years ago now. And it's a pay it forward, we call it, choir. We don't charge anything for our concerts, and we have 3 of those a year. And they're good concerts. We've had about 50, 60 people in the choir. And the concerts are usually full, packed house. But instead of charging people to come to hear the choir, we asked them at the intermission to donate to the featured charity of that concert. And over the 10 years the choir's been in existence, and I've only been with it for about 5 or 6 years now, it's raised about $150,000 for local charities. And it's just a marvelous initiative that Roy and others members of the choir started about 12 years ago now. Unfortunately, with COVID, we've had to put that aside. We're hoping maybe we can get started again either this fall or in January, but that remains to be seen as well. What else have I been? About 7 years ago, there was a group of us in town that formed a group called the Orillia Cultural Campus. We were hoping to get access to a piece of provincial property just outside of Orillia, the Huronia Regional Center, which has been shut down, was shut down in 2009. And we were hoping to get access to that property and turn it into kind of a Banff Center East. We've since changed the name of our group to the Orillia Center for Arts and Culture. But that's a group also that I've chaired for almost 6 years now, I guess. So, but it's been exciting. We've done brought a lot of entertainers into the area. We've done a lot of educational things. The First Nations group that I was mentioning earlier was part of that. We did that 2017, 18, and 19, 3 First Nations Writers Festivals. And the last couple of years, there were about 4 of us sitting down having coffee one day at the Mariposa Market, and we were talking about the environment and what steps needed to be taken. And we really felt, all of us, that the climate change was a threat that we needed to try to deal with. And so we created something called Sustainable Orillia. And it became a mayor's task force at first, and with the support of Mayor Steve Clark of Orillia and the council. And they have sponsored us for some funding each year for the past 3 years. And our goal is to create a community here in Orillia that's much more conscious of the environment, conscious of how to avoid waste, conscious of how to do away with some of the plastics and this sort of thing that we're all seeing around so much, and which are doing so much damage to our planet. And that's turned out very well. We were incorporated last year, and COVID has put a little crimp in our activities, of course, but we're finding that Zoom meetings and webinars still manage to get the message out. And along with a couple of other people, Suzanne LaPearl and Gord Ball, I'm a member of the communications team. So we're writing articles, a tip of the week that goes into a couple of local online media about things that people can do to live more sustainably. And we also write articles featuring some of the companies in town that are moving toward much more sustainable activities. And for example, I'm just going to send an article in tomorrow. There's a local insurance company, McLean and Dickey, that has just renovated a piece of property in Orillia, and they put in LED lights. They've double pane windows. They've insulated the whole place. They put in special hot water heating, so it's right at source. But they just felt, well, there's an interesting sentence in the article where they say, as an insurance broker, they are seeing the impact of climate change on insurance costs all across the country.
Right.
And you only have to think about the fires in Alberta and the fires in California and floods and storms and this sort of thing to see how insurance is a huge reactor to the some of the changes that we're seeing in the climate. So I guess that's about it. 4 or 5 different organizations, and it's been a pleasure to work with all of those people. You know, that's the fun part of it, is that the people you're working with are really committed people as well.
Mhm.
And they become friends, and you spend a lot of time together, and that's what makes life worth living, you know, with family and friends, and trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and creating that team
Yeah,
atmosphere, right? Yeah, that's what I always love.
Amazing.
absolutely.
Well, no
Yeah, you're
wonder. No wonder you won Citizen of the Year. That's you're, and I've always been witness to that behind the scenes too. There's a couple other clubs you didn't mention. I think weren't you and Lois a member of a Scotch tasting club? Was that part of the reason? Was that?
Yes, I'm not sure I got the award for that one, but
I
we
see.
are. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
looking
yeah.
forward to them back to I don't know whether Robbie Burns' birthday in January will be celebrated by the Scotch Drinking Club. Could be.
Right. Right.
And then the Robbie Burns choir usually steps up and sings a few tunes, and I'm a member of that choir too. So
Nice. And
yeah,
fun fact as well. City of Orillia, also hometown of Gordon Lightfoot, famous singer-songwriter. Also Brian Orser, the figure skater, and Stephen Leacock, the famous comedy writer or classic writer. And so now Fred Larsen. So you're in good company there.
and don't forget the Mariposa Folk Festival,
All right.
which
Yes.
has been in Orillia since 2000, and last year had 20,000 people. Not last year, 2019,
Right.
the last year. The 60th anniversary of the Mariposa Folk Festival is coming up, we hope, in 2022. So all your listeners, plan a weekend in July of 2022. Come up and really enjoy the tremendous acts that we get at the Mariposa Folk Festival.
You can
Lots
stay at Fred's house in the backyard.
You can, absolutely.
Now I wanted to talk, speaking of being on stage and performances, you mentioned it in your 1 minute life story. I was never alive for this part of your life, because by the time I came around, you were living the family life and you were a teacher. But tell us, how did you get into that singing trio? And tell us a little bit about where that took you up to and including meeting my mother at one of those gigs.
Well, it was quite bizarre. I was just talking to one of the fellows that was in the group about 3 days ago, and I asked him, he was also from BC, and I asked him, how did we ever decide to travel from Winfield in little old Okanagan to Toronto? And he couldn't quite remember the details either, but it happened. I just finished university. He happened to mention he was driving across the country in his blue Volkswagen. I said, "Oh, come along and share the costs." And I got to Toronto. He had an uncle here that he went and stayed with. I had a couple of friends that I'd met in UBC that were down at McMaster. So I went down to McMaster, and for the next month or two, maybe 3, drank a lot of beer probably. And then in November, I got a call from Steve, Rhett. He had to change his name when he went to Nashville. Rhett Davis is his name now. And he said he just met somebody in Toronto who was looking for a couple of singers. And the fellow's name was Harry Harding. And Harry had been with a group called the Highlights for 6 years. And they'd been fairly successful. They'd been in Las Vegas on stage with Donald O'Connor, whom nobody would remember now probably, but a very good entertainer. And they had been traveling for 6 years. So 2 of the guys had enough of the travel, and they were planning to leave the group after a New Year's Eve show that year. And so Harry hadn't heard Rhett sing. He didn't ask to hear me sing. Rhett vouched for me, and I think Harry's uncle sort of vouched for Steve's or Rhett's uncle. And so I ended up driving up one Friday in November, and again, we consumed a fair bit of beer and listened to the album that they had cut. And the next morning I said, yeah, I think I'll join the group. And so we worked for 6 weeks to try and put together some of the charts they had. They had an arranger in Toronto, a guy who did some fabulous arrangements. And the arrangements were done from anywhere from trio, instrumental trio, up to about 15, 16-piece orchestra. So we had to learn some of that. And I could read music a little bit. I wasn't great by any means, but I'd taken some piano lessons. So I could read some of these charts, and I could often, once we got going, I would often help rehearse the band before our show. And anyway, to go back to that November, we worked for 6 weeks or so. And early in January, probably around the end of the first week in January, we opened in Tel Aviv at the Sheraton Hotel in Tel Aviv. And Harry was kind of pretty worried on the flight over there because we really only had about a half-hour show put together.
Mm-hmm.
We could maybe add another 5 or 10 minutes. But he stopped at the manager's office in the hotel while Rhett and I went up to our rooms. And when he came up, he was smiling like a Cheshire cat. The manager said, no more than 30 minutes a night, because an Italian band playing in the lounge as well. And they wanted that band to, have lots of activity. And it was a very popular spot, the Sheraton Lounge in Tel Aviv. We were there for a month. And by the time we finished there, because we would go down to the lounge every afternoon when it was empty, and we would work on our act. And by the time we left there, we had about an hour's worth of material. We subsequently went up to a hotel on Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. And then we did a big show in Jerusalem. And when we left there, it was about 2 months we'd been there, we went to New York. And we did an audition for an agent in New York that our manager in Toronto had set up. And sure enough, we had a whole bunch of jobs from that point on in New York and area, Philadelphia, Boston, lots of Long Island, clubs in Long Island and so on. And over the next 4 years, 5 years, we ended up, and I'm not sure any of your viewers would remember this, but there was an area called the Borscht Belt. It was the Jewish Catskill Mountains. There were about 20 to 25 large clubs, two biggest being the Concord, which had a nightclub that seated about 3,000 people, and Grossinger's, which had a little smaller club. But all of these clubs had professional musicians playing the band, and they had comics, they had singers, people coming in that you would have seen on television in the 60s and 70s as well. And we opened for some, we closed for others, and Chris was born, of course, and spent several summers in the Catskills, because I met Pat, my first wife, in New York City very early on after we got there.
She was in the audience at a bar show, wasn't she? Is that the story?
No, she wasn't really. You remember Howie, of course, and Howie was a bartender, and we were staying in a hotel right on Broadway and 54th Street, and on 8th Avenue, just a block away, there was a bar called the Triple M, and we used to go there after our shows because, if you've done a show at 10, 11 o'clock, you drive back to New York, you get there about 1 o'clock, you're not ready to go to sleep. So the bars in New York stayed open until 4, and often they'd just shut the door, and if there were friends of the bar owner, you could stay till 5 or 6. And and that's where I met your mother, at the bar one night. And she was lovely, and went out with her for a week and proposed to her a week later. And
Wow.
we got married, and Chris came along, and then Jamie came along, and then many years later, you came along.
Right.
So after the 2 weeks of the week after being engaged, how long until the wedding?
About 3 months, I think.
3 months. Wow.
Yeah. We had to set up, get somebody to. Well, we had somebody that was going to do the catering for us. Unfortunately, about 2 or 3 days before the wedding was supposed to happen, he backed out.
Oh.
We were very lucky. We'd met a restaurant owner in the Bahamas, actually,
Okay.
because we did a circuit of Hilton hotels in the Caribbean that first year, I think it was. And we met Johnny Delustro, who owned an Italian restaurant on, I think it was 47th Street, just off 7th Avenue. And he came through. We called him and said, we're not sure what to do, Pat and I. We've lost our caterer and we don't have a room. And he said, leave it to me. The whole restaurant became ours for the afternoon, and he put on the spread food and drinks, and it was wonderful. Just amazing.
We had a show.
We had a show that night too, so we had to drive to the Catskills. So the wedding was, I think, around noon or 1 o'clock. Then we went to the restaurant and had guests there and had dinner in the afternoon. And then we had to jump in the car and head up to the Catskills, which is about a 2-hour drive, rehearse the band when we got there, and do a show. But my dad came with me, your grandfather, Lars, and my sister. They were both in town for the wedding. And I've never seen my dad quite as loopy as he was on the champagne he was drinking in that pub.
Right.
That's good fun. Good fun.
That's a strong Danish man who's used to his Danish schnapps too. So
he was indeed. Yeah.
Grandpa.
He said
Axel.
the next morning he had a little difficulty with the bed going around at night when he got to bed. So
those fancy
that happens.
Those fancy spinning beds. Yeah. That Catskill run is very renowned, especially in the comedy world, because those are sort of like the early years of what became stand-up comedy. Would have been, I guess, in the 50s, 60s, where comedians were always paired with bands or with like a crooner. And your group, the Highlights, that was a 3-person group, but it was sort of like a little bit like the Rat Pack, but you guys had a little bit of like sketch comedy. Like there was a little bit of shtick, like vaudeville type stuff. Like you had canes, or like I remember seeing pictures of you had funny hats or funny like disguises, like a Groucho Marx thing or something like that. It was very comedic influence. Yeah.
Well, there was one of the tunes was a special arrangement which had been written by the guy in Toronto. Earl Parnes was his name. I don't know if any of your audience would remember Earl. Long gone now, I think. But it was when vaudeville was king. And so it was Jimmy Durante, Eddie Cantor, Al Jolson, sort of little sketches. And, we had canes for the Eddie Cantor stuff, and we had hats, and we had schnozzes for the Jimmy Durante stuff. And,
right. You got a comedy cane back there, don't you, Brandon? Flash the cane.
I think I do.
Here you go. Yeah, we got one of those on top of our comedy banana shakers. Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Yeah.
So had you, before being recruited for this, had you performed, or like, did you have any professional background? When was your actual first paid gig?
Well, it really was the job in Israel was the first paid. Although Rhett and I, as we had gone to university, I was a year ahead of him. I was a year older, so I had gone down to UBC my first year, and then he came down in my second year. And one of the things we had done, we had a a rock and roll group in high school called the Emeralds. It was the time of the Diamonds and all things. So we were the Emeralds, and we did cover tunes mostly. But we did a few dances and that sort of thing when I was maybe 16, 17. And when we were at university, the student union often put on things for the students. And a couple of those, we signed up, we were hired, I guess. They paid us something, I think. Not much, but something. To do some Everly Brothers stuff. The two of us harmonized well. And we knew all those songs. We'd done them through all the beach parties and everything in the Okanagan. So that was where it sort of started in a way. But there was nothing professional about that. It really wasn't until we ended up being on stage in Israel, in Tel Aviv, Israel, in front of a paying audience. And we're getting paid by the club there, you know. So
wow.
And were you mostly doing trio singing, or like stuff. Was it mostly doing trio singing? So like,
yeah.
And what what vocal range were you? Were you the baritone? Were you the tenor? Were you the bass?
Well, essentially, I probably should have been the bass, but I'm really only a baritone. So Rhett was the lead singer, and Harry Harding. I have to say, for anybody in Toronto that might remember Harry had a magnificent tenor voice. Some of the songs that we did, Till the End of Time, or Exodus, for example, or Hava Nagila, at the end of the song, I would be close to the mic because I'm singing the low part. Rhett would be about this far back from the mic, where how do I do this? I'm going the wrong way. I would be here. Rhett would be here. Harry would be 6 feet away. His voice just filled the room. He could just fill the room. Powerful, powerful tenor voice. And he'd been in a number of doo-wop groups before the Highlights, or the group that he had been with for 6 years. And then we became the Highlights following those other two fellows stepping off. And it was a really, really good act. We had lots of standing ovations, and people really enjoyed the music we created. And it was kind of sad to see it come to an end, but all things do come to an end, especially singing groups. And we all went our ways. Harry came back to Toronto. I headed for the Okanagan, BC, and Rhett headed for Nashville. And he stayed there for about 15, 16 years and is now down in Orlando. Still singing, still doing gigs on weekends and writing songs, which he's been doing ever since he was like 15, 16 years old.
Nice. Was it all original songs as well?
No, most of the stuff in the act were popular songs, but special arrangement.
Okay.
You know, so we did a song called Hava Nagila, which Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila. You can imagine how that went.
Yeah,
you can imagine how well that went over in Israel. And then in the Jewish Alps, which is the Catskills. And, you know, the first time we did the show in Tel Aviv, in that arrangement, there was a little part where the orchestra would just play and three of us would link arms and we'd do a bit of a hora just around the stage. And, well, that was interesting because as soon as we started to do that, everybody in the audience jumped up and joined us on the dance floor, and we're doing this horror.
Nice.
We had to eventually step back onto the stage and finish the song because there was no room left to do any of that stuff. but that was a really good example of how good the arrangements were that we had and how they really caught people, you know. We did things like 76 Trombones, which is a big show tune at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So The End of Time was actually a hit that Perry Como had, I think. But the Highlights had also recorded a version of it. And we sang that as a big ballad. Canadian Sunset was our opener. Since we were all of us were about 6'1" or 2. And we dressed in a red brocade jacket with a black tux pants, black shiny shoes. And, when we came on stage, I mean, the three of us, two of us were blondes and Harry was dark hair, but we were three young, good-looking guys kind of thing. And there were a couple of places where we ended up having some panties thrown on the stage.
Yeah, Tom Jones.
But they usually came from the 40 or 50-year-olds. So, but it was great fun. It was great fun. I'll always be grateful to Rhett for taking me across Canada, and to Harry Harding for owning the group and letting us join him. And we had a fabulous time together.
That's amazing.
You might have answered this question already, but we always like to ask people, what was the most interesting place that you did a show? Would that be Tel Aviv, or was there an oddball place in the Catskills? What was the most iconic or weird or memorable?
Well, I'll mention two places in the Catskills. Certainly, performing in Jerusalem was pretty impressive. We were the only English group there. The rest of them were all Jewish groups. Mm-hmm. And we also performed for the Duke of Edinburgh in Toronto at the Royal York one time. We were back up there, and it was a special show, Canadian talent, and we got hired to do the show as well. But I think the most memorable show, one was at the Concord, which, as I mentioned, was a huge nightclub. They had a 15-piece orchestra, and all the guys could sight read. They were all Broadway musicians, and they hardly had to rehearse at all. They just hand them the sheets and give them an idea of what the tempos were, and they had a conductor. And so we performed there several times, and I have to say we did get a few standing ovations in that club. But probably the other end of the scale was frequently on a Saturday night, we would do 3 shows. We would open the show at one hotel, maybe around 10:15, and we'd do half an hour. And then we'd jump in the car and we'd drive to another hotel 15, 20 minutes away, and we'd close that show. We'd get there by, say, 11:05, something like that. There might be a dance team first and then a comic, and then we'd be closing the show. So we'd go on and do about 45 minutes to an hour. We'd finish around midnight. And then the agent that was in New York City also booked us in what they called bungalow colonies, which were places for Jewish people who had much less money, but they would rent a bungalow, and the bungalow colony would have a pool, outdoor pool, and ping pong tables, but it was nothing like these big hotels. So one of these shows, I'm not sure what hotel we had finished in around midnight. So we drive to the bungalow colony. We get there about 20 after 12. The whole bungalow colony people are waiting for us in the show. And so we need a few minutes with the three-piece orchestra. There's a sax player and a piano player, I think, and a drummer. Mm-hmm. And so we have to take a few minutes with them. And so backstage, we sort of go through and say, okay, here's the opening thing. It's Canadian Sunset. It starts like da 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 da, and then we come in, okay, and then we thought we would. We started. They started with the playing. We went out on stage and realized within 30 seconds that these guys didn't read music at all.
Oh God.
So I think I was the one that just turned around and said, "Stop," and we did the rest of the show sort of a cappella. The drummer would pick up a bit, and if they knew the tunes, and a couple of the guys could maybe help out a little bit, but they weren't playing our charts at all. It was quite an interesting time.
That's where you have to improvise.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. From the Concord, which was all professional, wonderful club and audience, to the little bungalow colony where the band couldn't read music and really, prayed a little bit to make sure that you got through the act. But people loved it. The audience that was there, they loved what we were doing, and they didn't care. They were getting entertainment on a Saturday night, so.
And I'm sure, like, after you stop the show and are like, okay, no, you're not doing that, and you continue singing a cappella. I mean, I'm sure people thought that was part of the show. I'm sure you got a couple laughs out of that as well.
Yes, I'm not sure that we were laughing, but the audience.
Oh, no. Yeah. Oh, no. Like, the artist inside you is dying inside because you're like, oh, God, please just get this right.
That's funny.
But you had to just go with the flow, I mean, people were there to see a show, and you had to do the show, sort of thing, So
right.
And like that's the beauty of live performance, right? Is like you don't get a second take of it. You just get the one run of it. And like if something screws up, you have to roll with it. And you guys rolled with it. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. You didn't have any choice, really.
Yeah.
Right.
And by that time, we had a lot of performances under our belts, and we were pretty confident that the act itself would capture most audiences, and people would go away happy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and especially when you're singing trio songs, like you have the different levels that can substitute without a band anyway. So like that's always a bonus.
Much of the every song we sang was in harmony, three-part harmony, and with the odd solo here and there. But
What was your solo?
I had a little solo in 76 trombones where I was supposed to go oom pa. And I never could.
Oom pa. Nice.
Yeah, I could never hit the bottom note. So in most shows, I jumped up an octave so I could at least sing the notes. I was supposed to be down an octave. So.
Nice. We want to start bringing this episode to a bit of a close. I have a question for you here. Now that you have, after your medical situation earlier, you have sort of an extra lease on life, or what I like to call bonus time. Is there a project or I guess the word is project that you aspire to be involved with or create? This could be creatively, or it could be more one of the community initiatives that you're involved in. But what do you got on the docket for the next 10, 20, 30, however many years you got planned?
Well, I'm already back doing some writing for Sustainable Orillia, and I'm also the treasurer for the group, which I just recently took back from the guy who had taken on the acting treasurer's job. That's pretty exciting because in September we'll have a Sustainable Orillia month. We'll have an electric car show probably in September as well. Last year we had 2019, sorry, at the local mall, and we had about 23 different electric vehicles, several Teslas and a whole range of others. We expect more this time because there's more models out. So that'll be fun. And I'm also really enjoying the work with the Orillia Center for Arts and Culture because we have a young woman who's our creative director, Kate Hilliard. And Kate is remarkable. Her background is dance. She's been a instructor at Larsen as well in terms of dance and other aspects of stage work. But we're setting up in Orillia, what we were trying to do is create residencies for artists who are looking to create new pieces. Whether they're the first ones in September will be dance people. There's a group coming in. After that, we're looking at a musician, a composer. We're looking for a theater person residency as well, and combining those residencies with workshops for local school children. Workshops through Zoom at first, but we've already had some workshops that are bands that we brought in over the last 5 years have gone into the music classes in the local high school and worked with the musicians there and so on. So we'll do more of that as we get out of COVID, out of the pandemic. And I'm really looking forward to how that comes together. We are looking to create a center for artistic creation here in Orillia. It's already a very creative community, as you would know, Joe.
Yeah, maybe Laughing Vikings can get involved and be a sponsor.
Yes, you certainly, that's a possibility. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. So those two organizations and the choir, we're hoping to get the choir together, if not in the fall, at least by January of 2022, and resume raising money for local organizations that help people. Awesome. That's always great fun as well. So I guess those three things, and I'll be participating in the Kiwanis auction in the fall as well.
Right.
So
amazing.
Gradually getting back into a pretty busy lifestyle again.
Yeah, you just golfed 9 holes recently too, and you parred a hole too. So congratulations on that. Now, Brandon, you wanted to share. We always share a quote of the week, a little inspirational quote. Brandon, you want to fire off that one?
I do. To be a father requires patience, love, and giving up the all about me attitude. And I think that's just wonderful for today's episode with you, Fred, and like also talking about fathers in general. I know my dad has been so patient with me, and shout out to Rob Knox. He's always doing stuff for the community and always on Zoom helping other people in Vancouver and Arizona. And so thank you for all that you do, Dad. Yeah. And so it's always hard to lose the all about me attitude. And especially as we are actors and artists, the less that we focus on ourselves, the more we're focused on our work. Tom Todoroff, our teacher, always says that as well. And so the more you're excited about things and the more you give over to the team mentality and the more you're giving of yourself, the better off you will be in the long run.
Nice, Dad. And
you're right. But the quote is a really good one.
Right. Yeah, and as everyone sort of heard from hearing my dad speak about the Citizen of the Year and all his involvement, I've definitely had a dad who's been an amazing role model, and a lot of times people are growing up and they don't have a safe and supportive family environment. But I would say I definitely had the opposite. If there's any ongoing issues from my dad, it's just having to live up to the bar that he has set and that you've set, Dad. So. Versus the other terrible things that sometimes kids deal with in their fathers growing up. So thank you for all that. And thank you. I have vivid memories of like hours and hours and hours on end in the backyard with when I was a baseball player and you were hitting balls at me, where it was just like we would literally do that all afternoon and all evening. So thank you for everything that you've done. Super happy to have you still with us and glad you pulled through. Congrats on Citizen of the Year. And the last question for you is, what advice would you give to any current fathers or future fathers out there?
Oh, that's quite a challenge. I would say love your children, obviously, and let them be who they discover they want to be. You know, rather than try and shape them into a little mini me sort of thing, you know. We had 3 boys, and every one of them was totally different. And there was no way we could sort of say, well, the second one's going to be like the first one, and the third one, Lars, is going to be like the second one. They all have their individual personalities, and you've got to give them the freedom to find out who they are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. But everyone loves the baby.
Well, that's true. That's true.
I don't know about that, but all right.
Right. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, for listening. Dad, thank you for being here today. I'm gonna, no shade to all of our previous guests, but you're my favorite guest that we've had on the show so far. So you'll be a tough act to follow.
Thank you.
Be sure, if you're new to Laughing Vikings, follow us on all the podcast platforms. You can listen and subscribe. Join us live every Monday at 6 p.m. Hit us up on Instagram at Laughing Vikings. And if you want to grab tickets to Comedy Alley, go to laughingvikings.com and you'll find Comedy Alley info there. All right. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic night.
See you soon. Love you, Dad. Thank you.